1960s Japan had entered a period of rapid growth. Skylines erupted towards the heavens. Neon-lined streets illuminated stores selling the latest in modern conveniences. Linked by cutting-edge transportation networks, tradition and custom clashed with experimentation and counterculture, and every living room basked in the radiant glow of modernity. Alongside Japan's skyrocketing economy, the animation industry was experiencing unprecedented output. Measured in titles, it was an increase of over 500%. If measured in minutes of anime produced, the percentage would be in the millions. Retold for decades, a modern-day mythology has emerged. The story goes that in 1963, the benevolent god of manga gifted the world with the styles and tools to create the most recognizable medium and Japan's most profitable cultural export. After pioneering every industry first, the creator departed his company, shutting its doors and leaving us with the legacy of anime. With each retelling, the legend of Osamu Tezuka becomes further and further removed from historical reality. To understand the truth, we must first separate fact from fiction. This video attempts to not only explore the rise and fall of Tezuka's Mushi productions, but also serves to understand the context and consequences of Japan's rapid growth on animation and society within that period. A 1962 article coined the phrase describing this unprecedented growth, and the name stuck. This is the history of anime and the economic miracle. Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy needs little summation. A cross between Pinocchio and Mighty Mouse, a childlike robot seeking humanity becomes the savior of mankind. Being the first fully animated Japanese series, Astro Boy and its creator have been mythologized to the point where the actual reality of its creation and impact have become almost lost among a chorus of parodying narrators. This section is not an attack on Tezuka. The man is rightfully deserving of praise. But the myths surrounding the legendary first anime have become so ingrained into anime's history, a small amount of blunt force is required to reverse the damage that has been done in its blind retelling. So, in the beginning, Osamu Tezuka's animation studio, Mushi Productions, was largely self-funded and staffed with artists poached from various studios with promises of higher salaries and better working conditions. They first produced a series of experimental animations designed to showcase the animator's skills. From there, the studio quickly grew, and the idea of making the first full-length animated TV series was suggested. Imported foreign cartoons and domestic shorts had been commonplace on Japanese television for almost the entirety of its then decade-long history. So, despite some cynics, there was little doubt that creating a Japanese animated series was possible. The largest hurdles would be financing and manpower. Luckily, this was 1962. After the forced resignation of Nobusuke Kishi, the newly elected Prime Minister, Hayato Ikeda, won the public over with his income-doubling plan. The realization of this plan is the often-cited springboard to Japan's economic miracle, and mirrors the factors that led to the anime boom of the 1960s and 70s. Now free from American occupation, the government, through the Bank of Japan, had begun over-lending to other banks. Combined with low interest rates, this flow of new capital meant investments were much more readily available during this period. Mushi Productions gained their first round of financing by working together with the advertising company Manesha, who agreed to purchase the airtime on Fuji TV, as they could profit from selling commercials during the ad breaks. Since animation of this scale had never fully been attempted before, the actual production costs required were largely unknown. After finding a sponsor, Manesha offered 1.2 million yen when their first offer of 300,000 yen was refused. Tezuka himself admitted that in an attempt to monopolize the airwaves, he accepted a ridiculously low budget of 550,000 yen per episode. To put this in comparison, Rough and Ready was a cartoon produced in America by Hanna-Barbera between 1957 and 1960. Each 5-minute episode had a budget of $2,700. At the 1963 exchange rate, a 22-minute episode of Astro Boy was expected to be produced on about half the budget, yet be 4 times longer. This is the origin of the infamous Tezuka curse. For the past 60 years, many have chanted that accepting such a low offer forever condemned the anime industry to be underfunded. Admittedly, Tezuka's actions made little sense and did have real-world repercussions. Yet, the reality has become obscured for the sake of a convenient narrative. The contract not only allowed Mushi to attract other investors, but the international licensing brought in another 3.6 million yen. Finally, there is evidence that the original contract was later renegotiated up to 750,000 yen, not to mention the claims of the additional 1 million yen by their first brand sponsor, Meiji Chocolates. The curse becomes further debatable, considering that future anime, even those created the same year, all received markedly higher budgets. This, combined with the absurdity of blaming the first attempt at a 22-minute series for the low budgets of anime produced decades later, removes a lot of the agency and responsibility from modern anime producers. But regardless of Tezuka's poorly thought-out scheme, the combination of a relatively well-known character, the saturation of television ownership, and the novelty of seeing a Japanese animated series meant that the first batch of episodes were an undeniable smash hit. It would be easy to assume that Toei, the nation's largest animation and film studio, would become Mushi's immediate rival. But as a large corporation, they were committed to first finishing their animated features, of which they would release 2 in 1963. The first, titled The Little Prince and the Eight-Headed Dragon, loosely retells the ancient Japanese myth of Susanoo the storm god's battle with the mythical serpent Orochi. Though not often talked about, the film won a handful of awards and has been cited as the visual inspiration for a number of modern works. Their next feature was their final film collaboration with Tezuka, and was a reimagined version of the classic novel The 47 Ronin, though set in the modern day with dogs fighting a tiger. Advertised as a Tezuka film, the Astro Boy creator himself only took part in the initial concept phase, which was later extensively changed, leaving little to show of their partnership outside of some character designs. Once staff had finished up their work on The Little Prince, Toei took up the challenge of TV anime, and they produced Wolf Boy Ken. The vibrant jungles and animal cast of Wolf Boy Ken can be seen as the antithesis of Astro Boy's sci-fi setting. Toei needed time to fully change course and commit to the still unproven television industry. Thus, Astro Boy's biggest rival came from a studio called TCJ. Originally a producer of animated commercials, they quickly leveraged sponsorship connections and produced a staggering 3 anime series by the end of 1963. The first was the adult-focused Village of the Immortals, which we will cover in more detail later in the video. Perhaps their most famous early release was Iron Man number 28, aka Gigantor. Adapted from the manga written by Mitsutaro Yokoyama, a young boy takes control of an abandoned military robot. Together, they defeat the enemy, who wish to use Gigantor for their own nefarious schemes. Like Astro Boy, the Gigantor manga received a live-action adaptation a few years prior. Oi, and the TCJ animated version also proved to be a great success. Their final 1963 show was specifically meant to be an Astro Boy killer. A science fiction anime and manga sees the memories and personality of a murdered police detective transferred into a cybernetic body, who then becomes the titular superhero, 8-Man. As a precursor to modern cyborg media, the series' legacy can still be felt today, though his method of recharging, which resembled smoking cigarettes, might have been lost along the way. 1963 also saw the release of a second, overlooked Tezuka series. Galaxy Boy Troop combined the puppetry of Kinosuke Takeda and Mushi-produced animation to tell the story of a small adolescent teen traveling through the universe. The series ran for 2 years and is reminiscent of Takeda's previous show, Spaceship Silica, from 1960. Even in the burgeoning first year of TV anime shows, all series reached high enough ratings and showed promising profitability that the foundations of modern anime were quickly solidifying. But it was the international market that played a bigger role in anime than anyone could have predicted. The 1964 Summer Olympics was a huge event. It was essentially the first time modern Japan had allowed foreign visitors. For many in the outside world, Japan was a defeated nation, devastated and impoverished by its quest for imperial domination. That would have been accurate 19 years ago, but defeat had turned into a tale of economic triumph. Along with a change in banking, the economic miracle was fueled by Japan's focus on targeted exporting. Through tax breaks and incentives, the government fostered industries that could supply the US and other nations with goods that were of high demand but could be sold at low cost. In parallel, the success of the animated sitcom The Flintstones and the low ratings of its follow-up The Jetsons created a new demand in prime-time animated programming. Despite needing to be localized, the licensing cost of anime was cheap enough to fill that gap and turn a profit. There are two origin stories of Astro Boy's introduction to America. In one, a TV representative saw it in a Tokyo hotel room, and the other claims it was brought directly to the US by a Japanese advertiser. Regardless of how it happened, seeing the potential, the show was licensed by NBC Enterprises. In a trade release written by NBC Films, the company announced that they had licensed the series and that Astro Boy's production cost exceeded $2 million. Reportedly, localizing cost $1,800 on average, so the show simply needed to achieve decent ratings and it would return a profit. It debuted in New York in September 1963, and by October its ratings had beaten the Mickey Mouse Club. Astro Boy was licensed to local stations throughout the country, and by the next year, as mentioned in NBC's next trade release, the series was sold to Australia, Nigeria, Syria, and the UK, though some of the deals fell through. Tezuka, having no experience with international TV licensing, sold the entire international rights to NBC, reportedly only earning the initial licensing fee. In spite of this, an influx of $520,000, or an additional 3.6 million yen per episode of foreign money, meant Astro Boy earned more than its budget. The profitability not only incentivized Tezuka to continue producing anime, but its success abroad helped establish anime licensing internationally, bringing in more revenue for the growing industry. And while exporting was able to bring in substantial foreign funding, many claimed that it was the domestic market that fueled the anime boom and economic miracle. The strict limiting of foreign imports and investments is called protectionism. This policy kept Japan's money in Japan, shielded national wealth, and all but forced its people to purchase domestically made goods. Classified as a developing country, Japanese protectionism was begrudgingly accepted by other nations. Thus, with the rise of the middle class and rapidly increasing spending habits, all of this money in circulation would never leave Japanese shores, and instead only continue to strengthen the economy and businesses. Foreign investment certainly helped bring more anime to the airwaves, but the real money was in domestic sponsorships and advertising. Meiji Sweets became Astro Boy's first and most often cited sponsor. Meiji sponsored the first run of Instant History a few years prior, so it had experience with anime-based advertising campaigns. Astro Boy was featured on the tube for Marbles, Meiji's brand of chocolate beans, and quickly appeared in a number of similar tie-in advertisements. Creating the Astro Boy seal of authenticity, Tezuka officially licensed the character to around 20 companies. Astro and friends could be found on everything from toys and stationery to clothing and foodstuffs. The robot boy even became the mascot character for a baseball team. Probably the most interesting advertisement I was able to find was this slightly bizarre commercial for a Tetsuwan Atom-themed automatic weapon. Tezuka was the creator and copyright owner, so all royalties went directly to himself and his company, something that many studios who did not actually own the rights to their characters were unable to profit from. Moringa Chocolate famously refused to be Astro Boy's first investor, but following its success, they too quickly cashed in, proudly stating that sponsoring Toei's Wolf Boy Ken was the first in a very successful line of character-branded chocolate milk powder. This was amid the intense battle for confectionery domination known as the Chocolate Wars. So of course, Glico, the third contender for the Candy Crown, sponsored Gigantor. packaging in lenticular cards and constructible stamp pieces with the iconic robot hero. Toei's next show, Fujimaru of the Wind, was originally titled Ishimaru of the Wind in the manga series, but to become more closely aligned with its sponsor, Fujisawa Pharmaceuticals, it became Fujimaru of the Wind. Big X was originally a manga created by Tezuka and was produced by TMS in their anime TV debut. Featuring transformations through injecting a Nazi super serum, Big X's anime series changed it to a ray gun, perhaps fearing that children would injure themselves in imitation. It too found a grand sponsor in cow soap, which was recommended to the viewer every episode directly after the theme song. As the copyright owner, Big X became another source of revenue for the proclaimed god of manga. Despite the integration of sponsorship deals and overseas investment, animation was still a costly and time-intensive process. Mushi Productions, by 1964, had grown into a studio of over 300 staff members, making it one of the largest animation houses at the time. Maintaining a labor force of this size was expensive, but it also wasn't enough. Their animators were beginning to suffer from being overworked. So with the demand for animated television increasing, a problem needed to be solved. How to produce more anime, but at the same time, use less money and people. The most famous method of cost cutting is limited animation. Using 12 or 24 drawings per second of film is known as full animation. Limited animation drastically reduces the number of drawings needed. This saves money and time, but at the cost of visual fluidity. Claims that Tezuka pioneered or popularized the use of limited animation is a bizarrely parroted part of anime history. The process was neither new nor special. In the US alone, shorts produced by UPA utilized the technique, and even the Flintstones, which began in 1960 and had a considerably higher budget than Astro Boy, costing $65,000 or 23 million yen per episode, was made almost entirely in limited animation. Looking back through anime history too, it was a very common method for making animations quickly and cheaply. The savings in time and budget from adopting limited animation helped, but the second problem was that the number of animators available was equally limited. Studios, and indeed all of Japan, needed to find a way to increase their labor pools. The idea that Japanese people would work at a single company until retirement is an often misrepresented trait of Japanese business. It is not an actual law, and is generally only applicable to permanent employees in the largest, most stable companies. Positions within such companies were highly coveted, and competition was high. Often, workers would enter as temporary staff members. Statistically, most workers would find themselves in smaller supply and outsourcing companies. These temporary workers and smaller businesses were an extremely cheap source of materials and labor. Best of all, they were contract-based. So when the project was complete, or a cheaper option arose, the larger company needn't fire anybody. They simply didn't renew the contract. Throughout the nation, encouraged by the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, hubs of specialized manufacturing started sprouting up. An area of Mibu in the Tochigi Prefecture was dubbed the Toy Village, as it witnessed the congregation of large toy companies such as Tommy and Bandai. Subsidized by the government, the major companies were surrounded by smaller outsourcing factories and distribution services. Working together symbiotically, these supporting businesses gave large organizations ready access to diverse labor pools, all the while remaining cost-effective and internationally competitive. Anime studios, too, became increasingly reliant on the independent contractors to whom they could outsource much of their work. Though only 104 episodes aired in America, Astro Boy ran for 193 episodes, and even early on, Mushi turned to outsourcing to maintain its release schedule. P Productions was their main contractor, but they also had their own series, Zero-Sen Hayato, on air at the same time. Thus their focus was split, and the subcontracting work was largely hit or miss. By episode 120, Mushi themselves were reportedly losing interest too. Whole episodes were being created by mashing together previous ones, sometimes with little to no new animations being made. The steady decline in quality and the rapid increase in competition was tanking Astro Boy's ratings. They dropped so low that Meiji threatened to stop sponsoring the show. Contradictingly, at the time and recounted in so many historiographies, Tezuka and Mushi Productions were supposedly on top of the animation game. Tezuka was approached by Fuji TV to create a bi-weekly hour-long series titled Mushi Land. The project was unfeasible for the already challenged studio and quickly abandoned, but the pilot episode, New Treasure Island, was aired in 1965. Related to his most famous manga by name alone, Tezuka claimed it to be the first TV animated special in Japan. He also raced to complete the first TV-to-movie anime with Astro Boy: The Brave in Space, released in 1964. Actually a compilation of multiple TV episodes, its main attraction was that 2 sections were in color. Again, a celebrated Tezuka first is debatable. Toei had been releasing cinema edits of TV shows for quite some time. Wolf Boy Ken had its silver screen debut in 1963, and Gigantor's movie re-edit, containing some new animation, came out days before the Astro Boy movie. Tezuka cast himself as a fictionalized version of himself in a live-action series called Vampire. The 26-episode series used composited animations for its scenes involving monsters and magic. For me, its biggest selling point was that it gave its audiences a precious glimpse into the actual Mushi production studio. This superficially leaves the impression that Tezuka was a rock star in the anime and manga world, but within his own studio, the realities remained mostly obscured. Juggling multiple projects at one time, Tezuka as a director or storyboarder was allegedly not ideal to work with. As experienced even in his early collaborations with Toei, he was often late with finishing his duties, setting back the production schedule, and wasting the production budget. So following Astro Boy, the next major production was done without the aid of Tezuka. The next major Mushi release was Jungle Emperor, also known as Kimba the White Lion. A first for Mushi Productions, the series was produced in full color as a requirement from their sponsor, Sanyo Electronics, and international distributor, MBC. Each episode of the 52-episode run was licensed by MBC for $20,000, or around 7.2 million yen. As a result, they had much more input into the show, such as avoiding blackface characters and any culturally sensitive topics. This, combined with Sanyo and Fuji's contributions, meant that if the show stuck to its budget of 2.5 million yen, it could turn a decent profit. The series is visually pleasant, and the orchestrated soundtrack is by far the most impressive created for a series at that point. Even without the delays caused by Tezuka, the amount of overtime and crunch required to create the series was extreme. The budget reportedly climbed to around 5 million yen, destroying the profit margins, and, worst of all, the intense working hours caused the shocking death of animator Yoshitaka Rachi. Death by overwork has unfortunately become such a common occurrence in Japan that it required its own term. Kimba's sequel series would not be funded by MBC, so for the confusingly titled Leo the Lion, Tezuka came back on board. Without MBC restrictions, it was a slightly more faithful adaptation of Tezuka's original manga. Leo the Lion featured multi-episode story arcs, but also racist caricatures. The viewership quickly dropped off, and the show was discontinued after 26 episodes. Before taking control of Kimba, Tezuka created a side series titled Wonder 3, where a group of aliens disguised as animals assess whether Earthlings should be exterminated or not. The series was sponsored by Lotte Confectionery, performed decently well in the ratings, but behind the scenes, the production was difficult. The studio had originally planned to adapt Tezuka's number 7 manga. Astro Boy's first movie also doubled as a backdoor pilot to introduce the concept. Mushi abandoned the idea after it was announced that Toei were to produce Rainbow Sentai Robin, a series with its own Earth Defense Force, and an early entry into the costumed teen superhero genre. Tezuka then reimagined the series to be about a secret agent with a telepathic squirrel called Boko. However, TCJ announced that they too were working on a series called Space Boy Soran, which also featured a similar squirrel sidekick. At this point, it had been 3 years since Astro Boy had first aired, and the industry had experienced rapid growth in technology, manpower, and genre. TMS's follow-up to Big X was 1965's Q-Taro, created by Fujiko Fujio, an artist duo who would later create Doraemon. They found their first anime wasn't the initial hit they expected, achieving some 15% ratings. Slowly, through merchandising and the popularity of its theme song, it eventually reached 30% ratings, dethroning Astro Boy and all of its contenders. The branding power of Q-Taro was a paradigm shift in the industry's understanding of how popular shows are made. Q-Taro's breakout success also ushered in the anime comedy genre. Pride the Master Thief saw Professor Pride attempt to pull off various heists. Hustle Punch, produced by Toei, had Junkyard Dwellers Punch, Touch, and Bun thwart the plans of Professor Garigari and his evil henchmen. Though comedy achieved solid ratings, sci-fi was still the most prolific of all genres. Toei's next film would be Gulliver's Travels Beyond the Moon. The curious feature sees a young boy travel with a reimagined Dr. Gulliver as they liberate an alien homeworld from its evil robotic dictatorship. At this point, Toei had firmly cemented their own distinctive design, and the movie looks quite nice. Internationally, it was mostly ignored, and domestically, it reportedly bored children. Like the majority of anime released abroad, the film's Japanese origin was largely obscured, and in hindsight, distributors were probably doing more harm than good. Because looking around the world, it was clear Japan was becoming cool. When discussing vintage anime in the West, the first two mentioned are always Astro Boy and Speed Racer. This documentary is largely focused on understanding 1960s anime, Japan, and the fall of Mushi Productions. But the studio that created Speed Racer, Tatsunoko Productions, demands our attention. Tatsuo Yoshida was a successful illustrator and manga creator. Among his early work, Ninja Squad Moonlight was adapted into live action by Toei in 1964. After hearing of Osamu Tezuka's plans for television, Yoshida and his brothers decided to create their own studio. Toei had approached them to collaborate, though their offer was declined after learning that they would lose the copyright ownership of their characters. Toei would instead create the 1965 series Space Patrol Hopper. Tatsunoko, in turn, produced Space Ace, released during the same year. The cosmic adventures of the titular ace and his companions features designs and themes extremely derivative of Astro Boy. But through the sponsorship of the confectionery company Crazy Foods, Space Ace proved to be a financially viable first attempt, with it airing in Australia and later in Latin regions. A colorized pilot was made for NBC, but they turned it down in favor of Cool McCool, a show conceptualized by Batman creator Bob Kane. The experience gave them the skills to produce their next series in color. It was Speed Racer, a mashup of Yoshida's Pilot Ace and Ipekuri's Mak Sanshiro. Speed Racer was initially unable to find sponsors. Eventually, the show found a sizable audience. And then, after Translux purchased the license, Speed Racer became an international hit, arguably one of the most popular anime series of the decade. Riding high on their success, Tatsunoko decided to simultaneously create two kinds of anime TV. The first kind would be lighthearted comedies, such as Hey, I'm Gazura, the animated adventures of a mini Godzilla living in the suburbs. The other style having slightly more serious themes. 1973's Neo-Human Kashan is a fairly bleak action series that features a robot uprising and a protagonist with the mind of a human in the body of an android. They would continue to create a huge number of beloved shows for decades beyond the scope of this video. Though their first anime largely echoed Astro Boy, Tatsunoko quickly returned to their own design sensibilities, and Speed Racer is one of the most well-known cartoons of all time. The company was a leader in improving the quality of TV animation, but theirs was not the only series making waves abroad. Marine Boy, a historically noteworthy anime, is actually the combination of multiple shows. The first was a 3-episode miniseries called Dolphin Prince. Released months before Kimba the White Lion, it is the debated title holder for the first color anime series. Dolphin Prince was repackaged together with Marine Kid, which was cancelled after 13 episodes, along with the 1969 reboot Undersea Marine Boy. The combined series is said to have been the first TV anime to reach British shores. And with that, it was undeniable. Japanese media had gone global. Australia and New Zealand, thanks to their proximity to Asia and the linguistic connections with the West, allowed them to receive more imported Japanese media than the average English-speaking nation. 1964's The Samurai was one of the highest-rated afternoon TV series down under. Fans bought as much merchandise as they could, and conservative groups condemned the series for the violence being broadcasted to children. In a fascinating parallel to an American TV cowboy's visit to Japan a decade prior, the samurai himself, Ose Koichi, visited Australia in 1965 and was welcomed by 600 cheering Aussie fans, many in cosplay. Cowboys and samurai would become forever linked when Sergio Leone released A Fistful of Dollars in 1964. The acclaimed film starring Clint Eastwood popularized the spaghetti western subgenre, and yet it was quickly discovered to be a near shot-for-shot copy of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, released 3 years earlier. The production company Toho won their lawsuit against Leone, but it didn't mean that they were against working with Western studios. None But the Brave, a collaboration with Toho, stars Frank Sinatra, and, unsurprisingly for the 1960s, carries a strong anti-war message, as does Tora Tora Tora, a co-production between Toei and 20th Century Fox. Toho collaborated with Aeon Studios in 1967's You Only Live Twice. The film is now notorious for Sean Connery's James Bond disguised in yellowface, but it broke box office records internationally and was the second highest earning movie in Japan. Many even cite the film as a major reason for the growth of spy-themed media in Japan. Takao Saito adapted the Bond films into a manga and went on to create the espionage thriller Golgo 13. Japan's most famous assassin for hire made his anime debut in 1971. The animation was so limited that it would be more accurate to call it a motion comic. After helping fund Frankenstein vs. the World, UPA and Toho began co-producing Godzilla films, both producers of opposing wartime propaganda. Working on a series condemning the use of military weapons is somewhat poetic. In the world of animation, American and Japanese co-productions began blurring the definition of anime for future media taxonomists. Vidcraft, now Rankin Bass, continued to hire Japanese studios to produce their stop-motion animated films, but also entered into co-productions to create more traditional cartoons. Investing in the growing cult status of monster films, they produced the King Kong Show with Toei Animations, which was followed by Tom of Thumb, a secret agent take on the children's story. Johnny Cypher was a psychedelic journey through space and time that is enjoyably terrible. And Zoom the White Dolphin, featuring Nestlé's aquatic mascot character, was produced with Japan's TCJ and French studios. The crossover of East and West in manga and comic books became more common too, beginning with a failed attempt of Astro Boy by Gold Key in 1965. The West saw comic book adaptations of imported Japanese series. Japan, too, also received manga versions of classic superheroes. Manga Batman was written and illustrated by Jiro Kuwata. Kuwata created the aforementioned 8-man series with Kazumasa Hirai, who himself released manga Spider-Man, a surprisingly gritty reimagining of the Spider-Man mythos set in Japan. Direct translations too did exist, such as the manga Bushido Muzanden, published in French martial arts magazine Budo in 1969. It is still surprising how much work went into reinventing characters for a different audience. Perhaps import publishers underestimated their audience's tastes. In 1963, a Japanese song with no English lyrics became a #1 hit in the US, Australia, New Zealand, and Norway. Dubbed Sukiyaki in English, titled I Look Up As I Walk, Q Sakamoto's album sold more than 10 million records internationally. The song's composers also wrote the debut single, Wakai Namida, for the Johnnies, regarded by some as Japan's first male idols. Indeed, idols were becoming a mainstay of the entertainment industry. One of the final Mushi productions released was 1971's Wandering Sun. The series sees two young rivals, switched at birth, both chasing their dreams to become pop music stars. Real-world idol duo, twins Emi and Yumi Ito, called the Peanuts, were regulars on all Japanese media, and even performed on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1966. That same year, Beatles fever swept Japan thanks to their sold-out tour. And Sony, best known at the time for their cheap radios and the Triton television, partnered with American media network CBS. Together they founded Sony Music Entertainment, further opening the floodgates of cross-cultural migration. The Golden Bat was produced in 1967 and took great advantage of cheaper Korean animators. The Spanish dub was apparently quite successful in South America, and, as such, the practice of internationally outsourcing anime began. Korean studio Tongyang Broadcasting Company claimed it as a co-production in order to circumvent the strict laws against airing imported Japanese media. Officially, one of the first recognized Japanese-South Korean co-productions was Monster Bem in 1968. The story follows three Japanese demons, or yokai, battling evil, and was part of the yokai trend that emerged following the series Q-Taro, and became solidified with the show Kitaro of the Graveyard. Featuring the adventures of a family of yokai, the show is a cultural icon in Japan. And like the Golden Bat, Kitaro began life decades earlier as a story narrated by the traveling storytellers, the Kamishibai. Obscure abroad, the franchise is revived every few years in Japan, and its sequel, Spooky Kitaro, in 1971, was produced in full color. At this point, the economy was in full swing, and the new middle class was the largest sector of society in Japan. By 1969, the majority of homes had a color TV set, and color anime was now the industry standard. But commercial television is only possible through advertising. So with new stations coming to air each year, the battle for ratings became fierce. When Astro Boy was first broadcast, TV ownership was around 69%. At the end of this decade, ownership had reached 90%, with 65% of homes having multiple sets. The exponential growth of broadcasters led to an intense domestic competition, which, as it always does with monetized media, became a desperate fight for viewership and advertising. And the weapon of choice, as usual, was the lowest common denominator content: sex, shock, and violence. Instances of public outcry ensured that explicit violence on television was completely out of the question for the time being. During a live broadcast, the chairman of Japan's Socialist Party was stabbed and murdered by a right-wing student in 1960. Riki Dozan and Mike Sharp, both instrumental in the popularity of television, became symbols of cultural decay after Sharp's teammate bit his opponent's head in 1962. Reportedly, there was so much blood that the sight caused two elderly viewers with medical conditions to faint and die. It is often said that sex sells. So without a doubt, broadcasters also attempted to seduce their way to the top of the ratings board. Fuji TV found success with what was called the first steamy drama. Daily Betrayal was a tale of adultery that got 18% ratings in its afternoon time slot. They then went further with late-night broadcasts of The Pink Mood Show, featuring topless dancers. The 11 p.m. show aired from 1965 all the way into the 90s, and covered a range of controversial and adult topics. Animator Yoji Kuri, a pioneer of the avant-garde anime movement, created over 800 short animations during its decades-long run. As mentioned before, TCJ, the producer of the hit Gigantor series, debuted their studio with the first adult anime series, The Village of the Immortals. The Taoist main character's raunchy escapades definitely raised a few conservative eyebrows, but they were sure to never break obscenity laws. Television stations were constitutionally free to air almost any programming that they wished, but to appease parent groups and avoid government intervention, they established a self-regulation committee in 1964. The government, too, preemptively tried to encourage wholesome programming by offering new broadcast licenses under the condition that a certain percentage of shows be educational. Toei took this opportunity and, with a group of other companies, launched Nippon Educational Television, or NET. This essentially allowed Toei to monopolize an entire channel dedicated to showing their films and syndicated shows. 1967's Pyun Pyun Maru was a Toei original, and was a slapstick comedy full of ninja, samurai, monsters, and robots. While struggling to avoid censorship, the wrestling industry was left devastated in 1963 when the godfather of pro wrestling, Rikidozan, died after being stabbed in a nightclub. Even in death, Rikidozan still attracted huge crowds, with a reported 12,000 mourners paying their respects. The wrestling world never fully recovered from his passing, and TV viewership saw a steady decline. Choreographed fighting would forever be a mainstay of Japanese television, though, and in wrestling's place came the rise of tokusatsu, or the special effects genre. Influenced by the superhero serial Moonlight Mask, and combined with the popularity of giant monster films, the genre was revolutionized by the Ultra series of TV shows. It began with Ultra Q, a Twilight Zone-esque program that explored what-if scenarios, usually with giant monsters. The series' popularity was immediately dwarfed by its spiritual sequel, Ultraman. It defined the Japanese superhero genre, where a hero possesses the ability to transform and fight giant aliens and monsters. Arguably, one of the most iconic pieces of Japanese media ever made, the Ultra series was developed by Eiji Tsuburaya, a special effects technician come writer-director who has been involved in almost every landmark Japanese media since its very beginning. From A Page of Madness, Princess Kaguya, Godzilla, Journey to the West, and even Astro Boy's live-action debut in 1959. Simultaneously, in 1966, Tezuka released his own giant monster series titled Ambassador Magma. And, aimed at children, Kaiju Buska, an obscure part of the Ultra series canon, made his debut complete with an animated opening. The tokusatsu boom occurred following the 1964 liberalization of movie imports, allowing broadcasters to bring in any foreign media they desired. In the past, licensing an hour-long show from the US cost only a few $100s, but now, perhaps in hopes of cashing in on new import laws, Hollywood licensing fees rose to around $4,000. Ironically, this made foreign media less desirable, and domestic studios quickly undercut their competition. Originally, American shows dominated Japanese television, but by 1964, not a single foreign show was in the top 20% of ratings. In 1975, there were only 6 imported programs in primetime slots, and none at all 7 years later. A 1974 study found Japan was the 4th lowest importer of foreign media in the world, second to the US, third being Soviet Russia, and number 1 being Mao's Communist China. Movies and monster shows did much to attract a TV audience, but it was the comedians who won the ratings war. Variety shows are synonymous with Japanese television. Hosted by a comedy duo or group, the format of Japanese variety programming has changed very little since the 1960s, and in that period, the 2 most aggressive primetime rivals were Konto 55 and The Drifters. Beginning in 1968 with the World of Konto 55 Laughs, the sketch comedy show, despite being criticized for its humor, was a huge hit, gaining an average of 30% ratings for Fuji TV during its initial run. In turn, TBS recruited a musical comedy band to star in It's 8 O'Clock, Everyone Gather Round. The show's main attraction was lowbrow gags and shock humor. Konto 55 went to war, releasing their new show, literally called Let's Blow Away the Competition. The program was continually on the media watchdog list for their risque segments. The most infamous was a game of rock, paper, scissors played against female contestants. The loser would have to remove a piece of clothing, which would then be auctioned off. Complaints came in that children were imitating the game, and the show was eventually cancelled. But for Konto 55, it was a success, and they moved on to their next program. Likewise, Osomatsu-kun, a show about sextuplet children, was reported to be the worst program on air during 1966 because of the dangerous acts that children would imitate after watching the show. But the ratings were too enticing, and other programs followed suit. 1969's Star Surprise Box featured female entertainers trying to guess what was hidden inside a box. Each incorrect guess resulted in their skirts being cut progressively shorter. The ratings were as high as the number of complaints, not just from parent groups, but from the celebrity contestants too. And it was cancelled after 6 months. As mentioned, comedy anime too was often equally derided, but Mushi's attempt at a gag series was far less successful. Goku's Great Adventure ran for only 39 episodes, and this slapstick retelling of the Monkey King received many complaints from the Japanese PTA for its foul language and irreverent humor. The final nail was the release of Ogonbato in the same time slot, which made Goku's ratings swiftly decline. Tezuka, who was mostly hands-off previously, began demanding tonal changes, resulting in a frustrated director leaving the project and the show's ultimate failure. While Mushi struggled, anime as a whole continued growing. Fujiko Fujio followed up their Q-Taro success with Pemen, a superhero gag comedy, and Monster Kid, playing with more Western horror movie tropes. Tatsunoko continued to maintain their two-style approach, with Genie Family, which would eventually reach foreign shores some 23 years later. Regardless of questionable programming, the television industry was booming. In contrast, the same could not be said for the silver screen. In 1958, an estimated 1.1 billion movie tickets were sold. In 1963, that number plummeted to 500 million. Paradoxically, Japan was experiencing unprecedented wealth, and studios were producing more films than ever. But by 1965, the number of attendees continued to drop to 373 million. Looking solely at the film industry, with studios going bankrupt and box offices crumbling, it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that the country was in economic decline. The most commonly cited reason for the death of Japanese cinema was the rise of television. Why pay money when you can watch a film in color from the comfort of your own home? In a reversal of fates, feature-length animations became less viable than TV anime. But regardless, Toei followed their Disney aspirations and banked on the international potential of animated films. Their next release was Cyborg 009. Adapted from the manga by Shotaro Ishinomori, the story is part spy mystery and part cyborg action film. Its sequel the following year, Monster Wars, saw a limited release abroad, but Toei, again, following the logic that the best way to find a Western audience was through imitation, released a series of features based on international fairy tales. 1967's Jack and the Witch marked Toei Animation's 10th anniversary. It was not an incredible box office draw, but the film is remembered fondly. After doing contract animation on the wacky world of Mother Goose for Rankin Bass, they produced The World of Hans Christian Andersen, the story of a young man discovering his gift for storytelling. In a cross between Disney aesthetics and established Toei design, it saw a wide release abroad and received decent reviews. Following this mild success, Toei released Horus, Prince of the Sun. Though also titled Little Norse Prince in some releases, it is a retelling of a myth from the Ainu people, one of Japan's indigenous ethnic minorities who inhabit northern Hokkaido. The movie continually receives wide retrospective praise due to the collaboration between Studio Ghibli founders Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki. Toei, on the other hand, had no confidence in their staff or the production, and gave it a theatrical run of only 10 days, leading, of course, for it to become a complete commercial failure. Despite hard feelings, Miyazaki also contributed to Toei's next feature, The Wonderful World of Puss in Boots. The star, Pero the cat, became immortalized as Toei's mascot character. While Toei generally managed to release yearly animated features, the wider film industry was crumbling. With less attendees, there was little justification for the production of big-budget blockbusters. So, desperate to fill seats, studios, as with TV broadcasters, relied on the same tried-and-true themes. 1963's The Theater of Life is credited as the first modern Yakuza film. Its gangsters were depicted as inheritors of the samurai code, and their righteous and brutal actions inspired countless future films. The Yakuza genre was further redefined in Battles Without Honor and Humanity in 1973. The original 5-part series and its follow-up trilogy were directed by the acclaimed Kinji Fukusaka, who is more prodigiously known abroad for the 2000 cult favorite Battle Royale. Samurai films, equally influential, were relatively cheap and easy crowd pleasers. They were churned out in such frequency that they were essentially episodic. Zatoichi the Blind Swordsman began his 29-movie run in 1962's The Tale of Zatoichi, starring Shintaro Katsui. And a personal favorite, Lone Wolf and Cub, was a manga adaptation. It iconically tells the revenge story of a dishonored samurai executioner and his infant son. The 1972 film earned such high praise and box office returns that it saw another 3 sequels that same year, a 4th in 1973, and a television series which ran for 4 years. Godzilla and other kaiju movies, though slightly more expensive, also proved to be a reliable mainstay of Japanese cinema. Godzilla starred in 11 features in the 11 years between 1962 and 1973, and in his wake, a whole slew of new fantastic beasts emerged. Mothra, perhaps the second most profitable kaiju, first appeared in 1961. The iconic insect was accompanied by idol duo the Peanuts, as a pair of psychic fairies who could summon the flying bug. Ebirah, a crustacean-inspired creature, made its debut in 1966's Ebirah Horror of the Deep. Daiei was among the first film studios in Japan, and it too, desperate to avoid shutting down, released Gamera. The giant turtle is clearly a Godzilla knockoff, but is a beloved and major contributor to the kaiju legacy. One of my personal recommendations is Daimajin, an obscure trilogy about a giant stone demon summoned to free a village from enslavement. Even with their best attempts at replicating Toei's monster films, Daiei went bankrupt and became a subsidiary of a publishing company. Previously, film actors were contractually forbidden to appear on television, but the abolishment of this rule allowed a wider crossover between the big and small screen. In 1967, the first Ultraman movie was released. In this period, the term movie is often just a reference to its runtime, and the Ultraman movie was essentially a mashup of 4 TV episodes. With the exception of some Toei works, the vast majority of anime movies too were simply TV show compilations, with little to no new material being added. Both Toei and Toho launched competing showcases, which were designed to bring children into theaters during the holidays. The format began with Wolfboy Ken's Great Manga Parade screening alongside Doggy March. It was later expanded into Toei's Manga Festival, and indeed, in a time where there were no commercial VCRs, these screenings proved a valuable way for fans to rewatch or catch up on popular episodes and series. Toho's counter was called the Champion Festival. Godzilla and other kaiju were often given top billing, but animation was almost always included. In very rare instances, an entirely original anime would also debut. Panda Go Panda, created by Miyazaki and Takahata, essentially served as the template for their future 1988 classic, My Neighbor Totoro. But as with TV, cheap comedy series could be produced quickly and helped generate consistent revenue for struggling studios. Shochihu's It's Tough Being a Man franchise saw 48 films being released in total. Konto 55 and The Drifters also had a long-running series of films each. Blue-collar comedies were certainly released at prolific rates, but even they couldn't prevent the closure of many well-known studios. Thus, nothing happens in a vacuum. The rise of TV and the decline of cinema perfectly demonstrates the consequences of change and that it is a real and equal transaction. In this age of applauded rapid development, who would celebrate the victims of the Japanese miracle? (1963 to 1973) had 5 major trends in anime. Science fiction was the one that started it all. This was followed by the comedy and yokai genres. The next for us to explore is the magical girl genre. In February of 1966, the popular US sitcom Bewitched began airing in Japan. The show apparently inspired Giganto creator Mitsuteru Yokoyama, and Sally the Witch was released in both anime and manga that same year. The genre proved a success, and Yokoyama, along with others, wrote a number of magical girl stories that were adapted for television. 1967's Comet-san combined live action and animation for its 3-season run. Ako's Secret features transformations through a magical mirror. Chappie the Witch, again, sees a young witch travel to the human world along with her animal sidekick. And Mako the Mermaid took inspiration from the fairy tale classic, The Little Mermaid. Directed by Tezuka, 1967's Princess Knight had ratings that were much lower than expected, and it was dropped by its sponsor. Product licensors threatened legal action against Mushi if the show could not complete a full run as promised in the contract. So Fuji TV agreed to step in return for greater revenue shares. This, combined with the difficulty in obtaining foreign distribution and the failure of Goku's Great Adventure, put Mushi Productions in a financially delicate situation. Toei Sarutobi Etchan had the main character use ninja magic and also failed to find an audience. However, the success of shows such as Miracle Girl Limit-chan from 1973 proved that magical girls were an unstoppable genre. In anime, as in the real world, it was a time of miracles and transformations. The 1970s World Expo was hosted by Japan. It was a chance for all nations to come together and envision the next developments in technology and what life might soon be like in the future. Connecting the retro-futuristic pavilions were maglev monorails and modern escalators, installed for the comfort of the 64 million international and domestic visitors. It was a demonstration of their technological progress, and another moment of pride for modern Japan. The World Expo was even the battleground for the 6th entry into the Gamera film series. To outsiders, amidst the glow of neon lights and sprawling modern infrastructure, Japan may have appeared to become an idyllic version of a modern nation. This peaceful and wealthy nation had become the world's largest exporter of toys. Their electronics dominated the international market, and even Japanese-manufactured cars were becoming the preferred vehicle over US-made gas guzzlers. Just 25 years prior, people were literally starving on the streets of Tokyo. But now, the average citizen had money and time to spare, and almost every few months, a new fad or craze would take over the nation. Unbeknownst to the casual observer, the transformative benefits of the high-speed growth period came along with some seriously negative side effects. Industrial clusters like Tochigi's Toy Village were encouraged by the government to allow competitive cooperation, keeping prices low and production fast. At the same time, these manufacturing centers created extremely high concentrations of pollution. The coastal city of Yokkaichi had become a hub for petrochemical refinement. The resulting sulfuric clouds released by the chemical plants caused bronchitis, emphysema, and a 200% increase in the mortality rate of local residents. Dubbed Yokkaichi asthma, it was part of the Big Four pollution cases in Japan. Not limited to, but famously, mining in the Toyama prefecture led to the cadmium poisoning of its residents. The victims experienced renal failure and the softening of bones. Patients were either immobile or unable to move without severe pain, often crying "itai, itai," or "it hurts, it hurts." Thus, it was morbidly dubbed the "itai, itai disease." Minamata, The Victims and Their World, released in 1971, documents the disease named after their city, and the villagers' attempt to confront the polluting Chiso Corporation during a shareholders' meeting. Caused by the dumping of mercury into the ocean, the victims suffered neurological damage in the form of mental impairment, the deterioration of motor skills, and congenital birth defects. The first cases were reported in the 1950s, and by the 60s it had become an epidemic. The company xiii ordered their doctors to research the cause, and upon discovering that their wastewater was most likely responsible, hid the results from the public. After multiple riots and investigative journalism, xiii was found guilty in 1973. Thus, environmental themes were a constant in the media, particularly in anime that was set in nature, such as Adventures on Rainbow Pond. The sci-fi hit Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, also created by Tatsunoko, regularly addressed the concept of technological advancement and its effect on nature. Yoji Kuri remade his 1950s short, Two Fishes, again comically showing the side effects that come from technological development. 1971's Godzilla and Hedorah captures the era's aesthetic perfectly, but it is most notable for its experimental filmmaking, not seen in other installments. The film inexplicably has multiple animated scenes. They show the toxic antagonist's growth by consuming pollutants, and others directly preach the movie's anti-pollution message. With only 15% arable land, the burden felt from Japan's rapid expansion by farmers was unavoidable. By the 1960s, Haneda Airport was already at capacity. To accommodate millions of inbound travelers after the Olympics, the government proposed the building of Narita Airport. It was one of the largest government projects Japan had ever seen. The site of the new international airport contained a number of small villages that were given no real consultation or warning. The fight to stop Narita Airport was called the Sanrizuka Struggle. Chaining themselves to trees and bulldozers, the villagers and groups of student demonstrators clashed with builders, riot police, and hired gangs. Construction was expected to last from 1964 to 1971. It wouldn't be until 1973 that the first runway was completed. During the first 6 years of the protest, 8,500 people were injured, 4,000 were arrested, and several died. Eventually, with only a single working runway, the airport was opened in 1978, and over the years the airport has continued to expand. Thus, the violence and protesting has never stopped. Indeed, there was a dark cloud growing over Japan, and, as in manga a decade prior, anime began to be influenced by the increasingly ominous atmosphere enveloping society. Just as it happened in the past, this was seen with the rise of the Gekiga style. Literally meaning dramatic pictures, Gekiga is difficult to concretely define. Employing a more realistic art style with mature themes, Gekiga's transition into anime was assisted by the introduction of the Xerox machine. First popularized by Zeus in Disney's 101 Dalmatians, the Xerox process allowed faster production times by perfectly reproducing original sketches. For studios that couldn't afford the technology, tracing machines using carbon sheet pressing was able to create a similar effect. The anime Gekiga boom is claimed to have been led by 1968's Star of the Giants, a fictionalized version of Yamuri's baseball team. Star of the Giants completely dominated television ratings during its run. Though it was not the pioneer, the series was a crystallization of many anime tropes still present to this day. Animated by TMS, they released 5 consecutive movies within the first 5 years, and a TV special titled Star of the Giants vs. Astro Boy, perhaps symbolizing a passing of the baton to the next generation of anime stars. Obviously, a flood of sports anime would immediately follow, and 1971's Apache baseball team and 1972's Samurai Giants attempted their own brand of baseball fame. Attack No. 1 was inspired by Japan's impressive Olympic win in volleyball in 1964. It helped expand the market for girls' anime, which in turn was followed by Aim for the Ace, anime's first entrance into the tennis court. Rebellious and usually more violent, Gekiga echoed the spirit of anime's aging first generation of fans. The ninja and samurai genre benefited greatly from the tonal shift, with classic shows like Sasuke and its spiritual successor, Kamui, the ninja, from the next year. 1972's Little Samurai is immediately recognizable as a precursor to many modern anime tropes. At this time, Tezuka and Mushi began creating a large number of pilot episodes, desperately searching for new sponsors. The back-to-back failures of their latest shows and the cancellation of Mushi-published magazines showed it was clear that Tezuka's stories just weren't what people wanted anymore. The only way to get out of debt was to produce other, non-Tezuka anime. After corporate restructuring, Fuji commissioned the studio to work on the series Animal One, based on the journey of a wrestler wanting to compete in the Olympics. Mushi and Toei both took on outsourcing work for Studio Zero's Sabu and Ichi detective stories. The series was purposefully made cheaply, but surprisingly, the limitations pushed stylistic innovation, and it is now a widely respected gem of a TV anime. After being hired to work on the action-adventure series The Boy Detective, Tezuka was finally able to have one of his own pilots picked up again. Dororo, like detective stories, was purposefully created in black and white. It tells the story of a samurai and a thief's journey through the world battling demons. Thanks to a 2019 reimagining, Dororo has seen a rise in popularity. At the time though, Tezuka's original attempt at the Gekiga style, in both the manga and anime, were poorly received. So much so that Tezuka demanded that it become a comedy anime halfway through its production, and had its title changed to Dororo and Hyakimaru. These changes only served to hamper production, and the reworked show was unceremoniously ended. Though Tezuka struggled, the Gekiga style was successfully used in far more works than just samurai and sports anime. Tatsunoko's Judo Boy was an extremely experimental series, where the main character was sent on a globe-trotting adventure in search of his father's killer. 1971 introduced Lupin III to television audiences for the first time. The decade-spanning action comedy, created by Monkey Punch, was not only popular in its own right, but would continue to be a proving ground for some of the best creatives in anime. Conversely, unable to find stable sponsorship, Mushi Productions had all but given up hope on adapting Tezuka's manga for the small screen. Thus, if he couldn't sell comedy or violence, the Astro Boy creator had only one genre left to try. Television was ultimately limited in its ability to capitalize on the erotic. Adult films, however, became the backbone of Japanese cinema. While the majority of movie studios were collapsing left and right, independent creators, producing cheap, crudely acted and edited films, were quickly turning profits. Overflowing with violence, sex, and radical ideology, it was the dawn of the pink film, a new genre for a new generation. Originally called eroduction or erotic production, a pink film is essentially an independent feature-length film that features sex as a prominent aspect of the story. By design, it is probably better understood as an exploitation film. Capitalizing on shock value and titillation, pink films immediately dominated the industry. Its progenitors were the new wave Sun Tribe films of the 1950s, which were themselves inspired by films such as Rebel Without a Cause. The first recognized pink film was 1962's Flesh Market. The original print was destroyed by police after only a few days of release for not following obscenity laws, but a second version, made with leftover footage, immediately resumed screening. The plot of the film is not as important as what happened next. The controversial movie cost only 6 million yen to produce, but the amount of media attention and ticket sales were extraordinary. Independent filmmakers and major studios had found the next big thing. In 1962, there were 4 pink films in total produced. By 1965, it had peaked at 213. And by 1971, of the 367 films made, 159 were pink films. Also nicknamed the 3 million yen films, their low budgets obviously meant there was rarely any animation to be found. 1971's lustful Japanese night story is currently lost media, but contained an animated opening that would have pushed cost far beyond that of the average pink film. However, the anime industry too was undergoing an awakening. Again, Yoji Kuri, arguably one of the most prolific animators in anime history, along with his adult-themed vignettes on television, released a large number of risque shorts for exhibitions. Titled Samurai sees 2 swordsmen fight over a comically sized woman. Man, Woman, and Dog sees a jealous dog vie for the attention of its owner. Rather than just mindless obscenity, Yojikuri's work is generally either absurdist gags or deeper social commentary. Mushi Studio 2, which itself began by producing experimental shorts, were still producing them during the early days of the studio. Mermaid recontextualized the famous fairy tale to examine discrimination and fetishism. Memory, released the same year, emphasizes the comical meaningless of existence. And 1966 saw the release of Pictures at an Exhibition, a 32-minute compilation of 10 shorts continuing Tezuka's philosophy of ironic futility. By 1969, the studio could no longer financially rely on adapting the work of Tezuka. Seen as a burden on the production process and increasingly sidelined, Tezuka defensively lamented that his studio was no longer producing art. Film distributor Nippon Herald witnessed the success of the pink film genre and approached Tezuka with an offer to produce a feature-length adult animation. The prospect of gaining funding while simultaneously claiming another industry first and returning to his edgier anime roots was an offer Tezuka couldn't refuse. Called 1001 Nights, the feature is a mashup of Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, Sinbad the Sailor, and Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Though all three tales had been adapted by Toei in recent years, aimed at an older audience, the content is understandably different. Domestically, the film had high box office returns and received generally positive attention. But behind the scenes, the production was so disastrous that it actually lost the studio money. Tezuka's original script was 4 to 5 hours long. The film incorporates wildly different animation styles for each scene, and coupled with Tezuka continually reshooting already completed edits, created excessive delays and an overworked staff. Mushi reportedly had to hire 20 outsourcing companies just to ensure that the movie was able to be released. The production was so expensive that though it was the number 5 movie of the year, it was a financial flop. According to Tezuka, his main grievance with the film was that his presence was not visible enough, and it failed to express his individuality. Despite being in the red and exhausting his studio, the distributor and Tezuka optimistically believed that a second, quote-unquote, artistic film would be a profitable gamble. These animations are of course not part of the pink film genre. By strict definition, a pink film is independently produced. Thus, each studio never produced a pink film. They instead had their own brand of the subgenre. Toei, under their Pinky Violence moniker, produced titles such as Girl Boss Gorilla and the Terrifying Girls High School Tetralogy. It was through these films that the Sukeban style, or girl gang leader style, emerged. Sukeban was one of the earliest forms of girls' co-opted uniform fashion and assumed individuality and rebellion. Nikkatsu, another of Japan's founding film studios, went bankrupt in 1971, and after restructuring entirely, focused on producing what they dubbed romance, creating such works as Ichijo's Wet Lust and The World of Geisha. The restructuring apparently paid off, as Nikkatsu released an average of 2 films every 2 weeks for over a decade. Tezuka's follow-up adult film was titled Cleopatra. It was inspired by the famous relationships of Egyptian and Roman leaders, with a convoluted science fiction twist. The movie attempted some greater scenes of experimental animation, but at the cost of interrupting the plot pacing. Domestically and internationally, the film was a flop. Advertised as something hardcore in the US, and releasing a few months after Fritz the Cat, Cleopatra was criticized for being childish. After a string of failed TV shows and animated films, for many this was the beginning of the end of Mushi Productions. Cleopatra was the last major project that Tezuka was involved with before he left the company entirely. In a 1986 interview, Tezuka stated that he was unable to express himself through television animation, and that he was not interested in Mushi Production and the animations it produced. He mentioned that much of the work they produced couldn't be worse. Cleopatra was not the last adult animation by Mushi Productions, or any other anime studio of the era, however. Toei, hoping to capitalize on the perceived success of Mushi's first adult anime, produced Yukio-e 1001 Nights. Utilizing traditional Japanese woodblock aesthetics, it is one of the few Toei movies that have become lost media. though we can assume it exists in a Toei vault somewhere. Nippon Herald also adapted the work of manga artist Yasuji Tanioka into a feature film titled Yasuji's Panorama, subtitle, Do It. The gag film ran in theaters for a little over a week before screenings were cancelled. Like many early adult anime, it would find future success in the then barely existent home video market. On the other side, television had become more conservative since the release of Village of the Immortals in 1963, but the Gekiga boom, with its more realistic designs, meant there were plenty of shows attempting to push the boundaries. Most notably was Go Nagai's Cutie Honey. Technically a magical girl series, the raunchy anime gained a small yet highly devoted fanbase, who have been gifted a remake each following generation. To the outrage and protest of parent groups, Nagai's manga, Shameless School, was also adapted into a live-action movie series that saw 4 films in 2 years and an extremely successful television program which achieved some of the highest ratings in TV Tokyo history. The pink film genre eventually became so diluted that its beginnings as an independent movement became mostly lost. Amateurs and auteur filmmakers' use of sex and violence was as much a way to rebelliously make money as it was a shocking expression of political ideology. These films challenged obscenity laws, critiqued all aspects of Japanese society, and condemned the presence of American military in Japan. Most controversially, it was effectively utilized as a socialist and communist propaganda tool. Pink, after all, is just another shade of red. In 1968, changes to a Tokyo University medical internship program led to a series of student strikes and the university calling in riot police to forcibly remove objecting students. In return, a general strike was called, and the students took control of the school. At the same time, Nihon University students seized their campus after discovering that the school had embezzled over 2 billion yen. Following suit, and for a myriad of reasons, every university in the nation was either swarming with protesters or completely occupied by militant student groups. As captured on film, barricaded within their universities, students became increasingly radicalized. Faculty hostages were verbally tortured, and huge melees of thousands of ideologically opposed students erupted behind fortified campus walls. Almost a full year later, the Prime Minister finally deemed it an official political problem and sent in 8,500 riot police to Tokyo University. The siege lasted 35 hours, and 650 police and 100 students were injured. But finally, Tokyo University was once again open. That same year, the live broadcast of Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon had a 62% in the ratings. The battle for Tokyo University achieved 97.4. Life magazine's special issue on Japan called students like these the Young in Rebellion, a group of music-loving, sleeping pill-addicted youths homeless during an economic miracle. As you are starting to see, this was a period of aggressive contradiction. Pacifists, terrorists, communists, capitalists, old and new. It was literally and figuratively the culture war. And as always, art was on the front lines. Many activists were simply trying to be heard, regardless of what was actually being said. A whole generation of pop artists emerged, creating some of the most iconic imagery of the decade. Though often overlooked, their contributions to the anime industry are important to highlight. Painter Tadanari Yoku produced 3 pieces: Kiss Kiss Kiss, Tokoten Etsu Anthology No. 1, and Kachi Kachi Yama. Each employs the pop art and psychedelic aesthetic to highlight the absurd influence the United States had over modern Japan. Renzo Kinoshita won the New York International Film Festival in 1972 with his short titled Made in Japan, which also poked fun at the commodification of traditional culture. 1971's Throw Away Your Books and Riot on the Streets is probably most emblematic of the frustrations that underpinned a large majority of youth culture. The award-winning film explores the disillusion and depression induced by a constant state of economic and social contradiction. But it wasn't only rogue artists who rebelled against the medium. Unionization attempts for animators led to massive repercussions for the industry. In 1971 at Toei, a slow-down protest in hopes of creating fairer wages led to over 90 staff fired or leaving. Tatsunoko lost around 70 to 80 workers in 1974. Aside from unequal salaries, offshore outsourcing was a major cause of the disputes. This is ironic, considering Japan too was still a notable outsourcer for American animation studios. Reiken Bass continued employing Mom Studio since 1960, and as their output expanded, hired almost every major studio in Japan to produce their animations. Toei worked on The Mouse and the Mayflower, and 1969's Smokey the Bear TV show. Topcraft, founded by an ex-Toei staff member, was established almost exclusively as an outsourcer, contributing to shows such as Kid Power, The Osmonds, and The Jackson 5. They also worked domestically on The Adventures of Koroboko, among many others. Mushi, too, were hired on at least 5 Rankin Bass productions between 1963 and 1967, including Mad Mad Monsters, and multiple episodes of Festival of Family Classics. During the university protests, an American fighter plane accidentally crashed into Kyushu University's computer center. Incredibly, no one was injured, but it did little to help America's public image. And in that regard, the Japanese had plenty to protest about. Japan was still host to a large number of American military bases, and Okinawa remained under US control. It was well known that Japan had profited greatly from the Korean War and the then-current Vietnam War, but these American war machines were launched from Japanese shores. So, complicit in the death of Vietnamese citizens, what responsibility did Japan carry? This was the issue that saw hundreds of protests throughout the country. Dressed in their iconic uniforms, student groups in 1967 marched on Haneda Airport and were met by 4,000 riot police. Though it was not the first nuclear-powered vessel to dock in Japan, protests against the docking of the USS Enterprise saw an estimated 40 to 65,000 people take part in demonstrations. The media focused on frontline student groups clashing with police. The students gained a large amount of public sympathy and television ratings. Not all student activists were violent. There were, of course, the hippies. Within Japan, there were an estimated 200 communes. These were called the Buzoko. Believing themselves to be the real deal, they looked down on the urban hippies or futen. Though labeled as posers by the Buzoko, many futen could be found congregating in Shinjuku, now the capital of modern art and fashion. Contributor to the Shinjuku scene, Keiichi Tanaami, using hypersexualized imagery, created his own satirical attack on the United States with his shorts Commercial War, Goodbye Marilyn, and Goodbye Elvis and the United States. In 1970, inspired by a recent trip to New York City, he also produced the Dada-esque animation New York Trip. A decade previously, protests calling for the end of the US-Japan Security Treaty were the biggest the nation had ever seen. The 1960 revisions allowed either nation to end the treaty after 10 years. That time had now come, and it was expected that the country would be overrun with demonstrations. Admittedly, there were large protests. 1969's Anti-War Day had all businesses in Tokyo ordered to shut down, and 25,000 riot police were mobilized. But even then, it was missing the sense of emergency and unity of 1959. Student riots were a daily occurrence, and the economy was booming thanks to ties with America. Witnesses reported the Security Treaty protests felt more like going through the motions. The calls for a return of Okinawa were answered in 1972, and the Security Treaty was allowed to continue. Indeed, it seems the American presence was accepted as a necessary evil for the time being. In animation, a lot of anime became routinely demonized by concerned groups. But the end of the 1960s saw some of the most iconically wholesome shows ever made. 1969's Saze-san, the animated exploits of Japan's preeminent housewife, this series has been a mainstay of Sunday night programming, and is recognized as the longest-running animated series in the world. The writing team, Fujiko Fujio, both together and alone, continued their success after Kyutaro, with series such as The Alien Visitors of Plumstar Dekan. but they would become forever synonymous with their robotic feline, Doraemon. A coalescence of their previous ideas, Doraemon was surprisingly cancelled after its first year by Nippon TV. After finding other producers, the character would go on to earn billions of dollars and a half-century career. Obviously, broadcasters aren't great judges of quality, but they are experts in manipulating baser instincts. So it is unsurprising that the media and activists quickly established a dangerous symbiotic relationship. If a big protest gets big ratings, then it stands to reason. To become extremely famous, you need to become an extremist. As the new left emerged, radicals within the movement began to break out. One fanatic student targeted U.S. Secretary of the State William Rogers, stabbing him with a pencil. Fortunately for Rogers, the would-be assassin misidentified his victim and attempted to impale the wrong person. On the opposite spectrum, ultranationalist writer Yukio Mishima attempted to start a military coup in 1970. After infiltrating a Japanese defense base and taking a commander hostage, Mishima stood on the office balcony and attempted to rally the troops to his side. His call to arms was both heckled and ignored, and a disillusioned Mishima immediately committed seppuku, ending the short-lived revolution. By 1971, what sympathy the public had left for student groups was all but gone when a communist extremist faction attacked and rioted on the streets of Shibuya. For 6 hours, the group clashed with riot police. They threw firebombs, injuring a large number of civilians, damaging buildings, and even a train. Most demonstrations, despite their size and appearance, were relatively safe. The number of deaths and serious injuries were so low that, despite the sincerity, observers saw it as performative protesting. This is especially true when compared to other nations during the same time. Thus, as mainstream protesting began to lose purpose, predictably, student groups' continual factionalization led to infighting and their inevitable implosion. As with the students who took over their university for an entire year, almost everyone quietly returned to their normal lives. However, there were a few who refused to go back. Instead, they had plans to become extremely famous. With the completion of Cleopatra, Tezuka left Mushi Productions. Actually, by then, he had already stepped down as president and founded a brand new studio. Called Tezuka Productions, it was a smaller studio that, until his passing in 1989, would exclusively produce anime created by the man himself. Though Tezuka may have been a burden on schedules and budgets, he allegedly did help with funding and some of the debt. So for Mushi, now under new leadership, it was either sink or swim. To get back into black, their outsourcing work led them to animate for the film The Great Adventures of Love, a Mary Poppins-esque musical comedy. But with their next production, Mushi were hoping for a hit. Joe Yabuki is a teenage vagrant who begins learning boxing while in prison. Through pure determination and spirit, Joe climbs the ranks to fight for the world title. Penned by Ikki Kijiwara, creator of incredibly important manga such as Star of the Giants and the soon-to-be-discussed Tiger Mask, Tomorrow's Joe is routinely voted as one of the most influential series ever created. Originally published in Shukan Shonen magazine, Tomorrow's Joe was the ultimate story of the little guy. When rival character Todorokishi died in the manga, fans were so devastated that a funeral service with a reported 700 attendees was held in his honor. Adapted by Mushi, the show achieved decent ratings, peaking at around 22%. And for many, the work was an inspiration. It was so popular that a famous student slogan was, "In the right hand, Asahi Journal. In the left, Shonen Magazine." The accusations of encouraging violence appeared justified when a terrorist group hijacked an airplane in flight, and on a declaration, one hijacker wrote, "We are tomorrow's Joes." The Red Army faction splintered off from the New Left in 1969. Their goal was igniting worldwide simultaneous revolution through violence. Inspired by South American revolutionaries, 9 members of the RAF conspired to hijack an airplane and then take it to be trained by their Cuban comrades. The Boeing 727 couldn't actually travel that far, so they instead demanded to be taken to North Korea. After failing to trick the terrorists by landing in South Korea, the hostages were released and the terrorists flew north. Upon their arrival, they were imprisoned, tortured, and indoctrinated into working for the North Korean regime. Thus, Ashita no Joe became a target for social groups. By nature, a story about boxing is brutal, but the series wasn't promoting terrorist ideology. And as we've explored, from page to screen, the media in general had become increasingly violent. Just like Joe, sports anime proved again and again to be surefire hits, and the subgenre of martial arts anime was the foundation for the majority of modern shonen anime. Intimidating names, though common, may be slightly misunderstood. Goro the Terrible wasn't a terrible person, and the series' kicking demon was actually inspired by a real-life kickboxer. Based on the life of a karate master, 1973's Karate Master was written by Tomorrow Joe's author, Ikki Kajawara, and is the segue for introducing the acclaimed pro wrestling series Tiger Mask. The anime aired in 1969, and Tiger Mask helped spark a resurgence in actual wrestling viewership, so much so that there are generations of real wrestlers that don the iconic cowl. In other genres, that same year TMS began producing an animated version of The Moomins. Created by author Tove Jansson, he gave a simple request. The series should contain no fighting, machines, or money. Astonishingly, the higher-ups claimed that Japanese audiences were not interested in cute things. As a result, the once innocent characters became crass, violent, started businesses, and even threatened each other with guns. Halfway through the series, Mushi Pro were commissioned to take over the production. But even with the changes made and a reboot attempt, the original creator refused to allow it to have an international release. News media routinely condemned the entertainment industry for corrupting society. However, with their quest for ratings, they were easily the largest source of print and televised violence. In 1971, 2 radicals broke into a military base in Osaka. There, they murdered a soldier while searching for uniforms and weapons. Later, an article was published with information unknown to the public. The resulting investigation shockingly revealed that the mission was directly funded by scoop-hungry journalists. As the media spotlight increased their notoriety, extremist groups began splintering further. Between 1969 and 1972, there were over 100 incidents involving actual bombs. By far, the most infamous Japanese terrorist group was the Japanese Red Army and its leader, Fusako Shigenobu, aka the Red Queen. In 1971, Fusako traveled to Lebanon and allied the JRA with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Her role as commander is debated as convenient fiction, but she was unquestionably the face of the organization. Pink film directors Koji Wakamatsu and Masao Adachi were invited to the Middle East to document the JRA cause. Titled The Red Army PFLP Declaration of War, the documentary was recruitment propaganda and a manifesto with Fusako proselytizing that only through armed revolution can world imperialism be defeated. Another splinter group, after horrifically purging their own members, took a lodge manager hostage while fleeing from the police. After 10 days of round-the-clock news coverage, police stormed the mountain inn and rescued the captive caretaker. In the skirmish, 2 police had died, but the radicals' TV ratings were higher than the Sapporo Winter Olympics opening ceremony. Now, along with violence, militarism began appearing again in anime. Tatsunoko produced a series called The Decision. The anime attempted to retell famous scenes from World War II. Celebrated for the accuracy and detail of its art, the story is based on true events, yet ignores the darker side in favor of nostalgic symbolism. Norakuro, the star of Japanese wartime propaganda, also returned to the screen in 1970, once again climbing the ranks of the Japanese military. But everything came to a head in 1972, when 3 members of the JRA arrived in Israel. At the hands of Japanese terrorists, the Lod Airport massacre saw the deaths of 26 innocent people and the injury of 80 more. The next year, fighting between Israel and the Arab coalition would see the death of over 10,000 people. It was called the Yom Kippur War. In retaliation for America supporting Israel, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries put a full embargo on oil exports to the United States and its allies. At the time, Japan was one of the biggest oil importers in the world. It literally fueled the economic miracle, and 83% of that oil came from the Middle East. The once neon-lined streets became shrouded in darkness. Theaters were forced to shut down, and people were panically hoarding toilet paper. Simultaneously, President Nixon decoupled the US dollar from the gold standard. This increased the value of the yen, making Japanese goods much more expensive, both abroad and at home. Combined with international demands for Japan to end protectionism, the Japanese economy was in freefall. Companies large and small declared bankruptcy. For those still in Mushi Productions, already in a precarious position, it made sense to hit the eject button. The final productions from Mushi, such as Yashi Lion and Anderson's Stories, were quite well made, but financially it wasn't enough. Year on year, the number of Mushi shows and staff was shrinking. Rounding out the adult-oriented film trilogy, they rushed to release Belladonna of Sadness, a psychedelic and spiritual journey through France. Though extremely well-rated decades later online, the film, released just days after the bankruptcy announcement, bombed completely in theaters. In the final gasps during the closure of Mushi Productions, they curiously produced the anime Little Wanza, a show whose main character was the mascot for Sanwa Bank. Wanza was originally designed by Tezuka, so the reason for the show may raise some speculation. Finally, Mushi worked partly on the German co-production Vicky the Viking, and that was the end. In a little over a decade, the studio credited for kicking off the anime TV boom went bust. Despite claims that his studio was made to produce experimental animation, they still produced TV anime. The first work they produced was The Marvelous Melmo in 1971. The amount of adult content aimed at children was heavily criticized, and it couldn't compete in the ratings against Saze-san. In his 1986 interview, Tezuka lamented that there were no more artists or Japanese representatives in animation, and believed that he alone was taking on the task by distributing only good animation abroad. The statement was far from reality, however. Fleeing the collapse of Mushi Pro, various staff established the industry's most influential studios. Sunrise Studio began debuting the comedy Chief Joker in 1972, and followed it up with Zero Tester the next year. Madhouse Studio, after co-producing Aim for the Ace, would become one of the most defining animation houses in Japan. Even while Mushi's doors were still open, the 70s introduced some of the most influential series of the industry. Go Nagai's Devilman saw its simultaneous manga and anime debut in 1972. Though it didn't achieve exceptional ratings, Devilman, along with Nagai's next series, Mazinger Z, had such an effect on audiences that the next generation of anime, and indeed entertainment, was entirely transformed. Japan quickly recovered from the 1973 economic shocks, renewing diplomatic relations with the Middle East and turning towards alternative power sources such as hydroelectric and nuclear power stations. Production once again resumed. A surge in international demand for fuel-efficient vehicles and reliable consumer electronics helped bring the economy back from the brink. Though it would never again reach the heights of the rapid growth period, the Japanese economic miracle would continue on for another 18 years. Thus, the term high-speed growth period is a concept that I believe can be applied to so much more than Japan's miracle economy. Anime saw more works created during this 10-year period than every preceding decade combined. Transportation, technology, and society evolved at unparalleled speed. But as time marches ever forward, we forget this rapidity applies to both positive and negative. Japan's movie industry almost instantaneously imploded. New wave industrialization epidemically damaged local populations, and society, ignited by the fires of change, became a series of powder kegs, indiscriminate in their volatility. A nation which celebrated its pacifism simultaneously profited immensely from war. Its brief penance seems easily justified or even lacking when balancing the profit and bloodshed. And a man worshipped as a god abandoned his creation after unintentionally ensuring its demise. Though right to be immortalized, over half a century of echoed stories have quite literally shrouded history in pointless myth and legend. But our story is far from over. Years of adaptation, experimentation, and innovation had cultivated powerhouses of artistic creation. The future was looking bright. But, as we have seen, a lot of changes can happen in 10 years. So thank you for watching another one of my videos. I've spent a year and a half researching, writing, and editing. Right now, as of this recording, I've just finished the voiceover for the second half of part 3. It took 7 hours to record this, and I'm losing my voice. I hope you enjoyed part 3. I tried hard to make the best video I possibly could. If you could share it, or like it, or just, watch it twice, I would greatly appreciate that. Also, I have a Patreon if you want to check that out. I occasionally do production updates, but to anyone who's donated ever, thank you so much. That's amazing. I don't know what to do with that. So, as of right now, I'm going to take a month or so off where I can relax and do some of the things that I've been meaning to do, but haven't had the time because of this video. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm WooKong, and goodbye.